I think it's understanding that this is the people side of it, right? People are emotionally attached to things, and change is hard, change is different. What's in it for me? How does this impact my work? So this is very useful. It takes the stale, if you will, the online, the robot, the chat GPT scary item thing, whatever that is out there that scares everybody, to here's how it can be helpful, just do it, which I feel is how some change happens.
Welcome to AI Fishbowl, the show where you get to watch as we coach and train education professionals to solve their problems using AI tools.
So get ready to elevate your educational practices with AI Fishbowl with me, Audrey Ellis, and Zia Hassan.
All right. Chuck, thanks so much for being here. I want to just hear a little bit from you about what your current role is, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about your experience with AI.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. This is exciting. Appreciate the conversation. And my current role is Vice Chancellor of the Community College System of New Hampshire. Been in this role a little over 7 months. Been in the community college system for over 20 years, most recently as a college president. And looking forward to diving into even more details along the way.
All right. So tell me how your current level of confidence is with generative AI on a scale of maybe 1 to 5. Where do you fall in terms of 1 being like you never use it, 5 you're a super user?
You use the term confidence. I'm confident in that I would try anything. I'm a novice when it comes to really utilizing any of the tools. I've got this awareness. So I'll put myself in the 3 area probably if we have to drill into numbers. No chip in my brain, but certainly an interest, but confident in that I'll try anything. I'm not afraid of technology. So how's that?
I appreciate that. And I can confirm that I do not have a chip in my brain either. I can't speak for Zia. Can you confirm?
That was my next question.
I can't say yes or no to that. I think the chip disallows me from talking about the chip.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Well, I certainly do not. But I appreciate your confidence. I know for a lot of folks, like just kind of getting over the fear factor is the first step. So I'm glad that we are not getting over that hurdle, but obviously that is an okay place to be too. So tell me about, have you tried using generative AI for any of your kind of day-to-day tasks? What kind of applications maybe have you experimented with? And if none, that's okay too.
Sure. I guess the most recent is it was asked for a reference, write a recommendation letter, and my thought was I've done 100 of these. I used to just take them, change the name, add a few more personal details, and I just said, let's see what ChatGPT says. And I said I'd like a reference letter for this type of role for this person, et cetera, et cetera. And it came in at, I'd say, 95%, and I just had to do a little customizing, and it was ready to go.
Okay.
So saved me probably 20 to 30 minutes.
So, all right, well, I would love to hear a little bit about kind of what kinds of tasks you typically oversee or kind of do on a day-to-day in your role as Vice Chancellor. Maybe we can pinpoint 1 or 2 use cases for you and Zia to target.
Sure. And I guess from a broad brush painting here, I oversee academic and student services for the community college system. So I work with all of our college leadership teams. But in short, some of the things I'm trying to do is increase efficiency, reduce redundancy. We have 7 community colleges. Within our business practices, we have folks that are doing things 7 different times over, 7 different ways, whether it's a registrar, a bursar, contacting students, enrollment, reporting. Those are all done 7 different ways. So we're trying to find methods that we could say, all right, let's run this report once and it covers all 7. So those are the places we are right now. It was my morning meeting this morning. Early college students, high school students taking college courses, how they register, how they are billed. Those are some of the things that we're saying this is a priority because this is such a growing population. How do we make this easier for people? So and I can give you 50 other examples, but those are some of the things people are coming together and saying, why are we doing this 7 different ways? We're waiting for consensus where we should just be moving forward and saying, this is the best way, pick it and go.
So I hear a couple of opportunities here, and I'm curious when you and Zia kind of dig into it where this goes. But there's kind of two ways you could approach getting started with, let's just pick like one specific task that is done 7 different ways across the 7 institutions. One might be like designing a session that you could use to get all of those stakeholders from the 7 institutions to co-create like a singular process. Alternately, and that's like the more kind of human intensive version. Another route could be uploading those processes to a system and having it suggest a singular approach, or suggesting areas that that efficiencies could be found. I'm curious if if you gravitate towards one or the other of those approaches, because they're a little different in kind.
I mean, the latter, the second one you mentioned, that is less human connected to some degree. Less, you said human intensive, but I'm also using connected, meaning somebody who has ownership for their own process they might have developed. Rather than saying, this is mine, 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 we could say, here is the process that needs to be completed. I'm thinking in my mind about onboarding new students, for example, from they've already applied, been accepted, but now it's getting them to orientation, getting them to register, comfort with student information systems, Canvas, our learning management system, Rave, which is our alerts. I can go right through with your academic plan and meeting with faculty. I mean, it's all done at each college. It's just done in a different way. So there isn't necessarily consistency, which to me, from the student perspective, is if they're taking courses at multiple colleges, which some of our students do, they have to learn how to be a student a couple of different times.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if it was consistent, say, this is how, and then we can scale it and say, okay, early college students in high school, this is how you do it. Adult learners online, we can scale it after that once we have the process down and consistent.
So that sounds like, and I'm curious to hear, it sounds like the reason that you're interested in kind of like the less human connected version is that maybe people will be less likely to kind of cling to the ownership that they have, not cling, that's kind of a negative implication, but like they will feel maybe less attached to a process because they're the one who created it or owns it. But do you feel like there would be more receptivity from the 7 colleges if it was created kind of in a void of their perspectives?
I think so. I mean, I'm hypothesizing to some degree, but if I were to say, can we all agree these are the 7 or 8 things we want new students to learn?
Mm-hmm.
It's not we haven't discussed how or when or any of that. This is what we need them to learn.
Okay.
I think we could get to a place with everybody and say, yeah, we want them to log into all these tools and et cetera, have them register. But once we start saying, okay, no, what is the process at such and such a college? Well, this is the timing of it. This is who does it because she's very good with that. And all of a sudden, it starts becoming personal.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to say, how do we stay objective and say, these are the things we want to make sure students have done?
It's interesting. I feel like you're describing AI. The main utility in this case is being an objective third party, rather than necessarily like doing something that revolutionary. So that's really interesting. So I think what maybe could be an interesting practice session, Zia, and I'll let you kind of take it from here. Well, I guess, Chuck, do you have a specific like deliverable or output in mind that you would hope that in this first iteration with we don't have your internal documents on hand today. So like what would be a useful output to get you started in this direction for today?
Well, I mean, I'm not in a place to ever say best practice, but if we had a suggested order of operations for community college students onboarding to become full students registered on their pathways, their comfort level, their interaction with other students, with faculty, if there is, whether it's an order of operations, I use the math term, or if it's a sequence, or I guess as a deliverable, if I just was able to say, look, here's a suggested way, here is a way it could be done. What I mean, nobody owns it, it's not personalized, but geez, here's maybe even founded in research to some degree would be a bonus.
Okay, that sounds good. And one of the things I'm hearing that I like is, and then I'll hand it over to Zia, is this isn't going to be like, and AI recommended this because it is the only way forward, hard stop, it's perfect. It is fine, tear it up, but let's tear up something that no one feels that personally attached to. And then this can be a great foundation for our collaborative work towards a streamlined process.
Right. It gives us a starting place, right? Instead of bringing everyone together, putting on the board, mapping things out, like give us something to work with. We're already 70% of the way there.
Sure.
I'd be really comfortable with that.
Okay. All right. Well, Zia, does that give you enough to go on?
I believe it does. Let me excuse me. Let me reflect that back at you, Chuck, so that I make sure that I'm on the same page with you. You're trying to come up with a somewhat of a formal process where there's a document that someone could follow to say what is the path for a student to take from they've been accepted to the college to onboarding and ready for class. And right now it's kind of scattered. There's a lot of different people that do it in different ways. So you could hand this document to someone and say, this is the way that this is like the standard way of doing it. Of course, there's variability depending on who you are and how you work. But this way, at least we know, we all agree, this is the standard way of doing it. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. And as you say, variability, there's variability 7 different ways. But if we came and said, this is the standard, then we can vary all we want from there.
Great. All right, cool. So our deliverable today is going to be hopefully a document that you can take back to your team today. So first, I'm just going to give it a little bit of context. I'm going to let it know what we're doing. And you said you're a 3. Part of that was your confidence level. But in terms of using this, is it something you use every day? Is it something that you've tried a couple times, or it's kind of like I haven't really touched it yet?
Tried a couple times, downloaded the app. I play with it. Audrey, I think I sent you a message last week. Hey, there's a new version that's free. I'm downloaded, reinstall, playing with that, and just ask it random questions, but haven't gotten to the point where I've really engineered specific enough questions to try to get something a work product deliverable out of it. So
okay.
This part would be really useful.
Great. Yeah. So we call it prompt engineering. And what that means is trying to ask a really good question to ChatGPT. So that's one term. The second term you'll hear today is iterative prompting, meaning that after we get that first kind of response back from ChatGPT, we're going to start having a little chat with it and refining it to get it exactly where you need it to be. So I'm going to give it some context of a network of community colleges. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. I currently have a number of processes that need to be formalized and documented. I want to use GPT to create these documents. And what I'm going to do is, to start off, we could put this prompt in there, and probably what it would do would give us a bunch of stuff back that may or may not be relevant. And that's not a terrible way of working. But one thing that Audrey does that I really like is I'll say, before we continue, ask me some clarifying questions that would make this process more efficient. And so what this will do is, instead of just giving me the answer, you probably heard like AI sometimes just like make stuff up. So we're trying to stop it from doing that a little bit by asking us questions. And then that way we can see if there's anything we haven't considered yet. So I'm going to pop that in there, and we're going to see what it gives us. And you'll notice this is memory updated, and it's making sure it knows that I am now the Vice Chancellor of the network. I'd figure out how to maybe clear that memory out. I'm sure it's the easy thing to do at some point. So yeah, manage memories. Okay, here we go. Now, the questions that it comes out with, don't be worried that we're going to be going through every single one of these. This is just to give us a little brainstorm and to say, like, maybe there's some things in here that are more important than others. So when you see this come up and you see some of these questions, what comes up in your mind as what's important?
I mean, stakeholders jumps off the page because it's about student experience as a primary stakeholder, as they're the ones going through. But when I talked about ownership of processes, it is faculty, staff, exactly. So I think they've landed on the stakeholders there.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. Okay, well, so what I'm going to say is, well, let's answer that question. Let's talk about the stakeholders. And one thing I will do, you'll see me do here in a second, is I'm going to hold Shift and hit Enter, or Shift and Return. And if you don't know, in a dialog box like the one we're in right now, that will give us some white space, so that we can ask something without having to type it all into one tiny little paragraph. So I'm going to say, here are some of the stakeholders. And what I heard you say is that one of the most important stakeholders are the students. We really want to optimize for their experience. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah.
Okay. And also the faculty and administrators.
Yeah. Staff,
Fair.
administrative staff.
Administrators, staff will be using this process. So, and they will be the ones that are actually reading this document, right? Yeah.
Right. This will be the guide for them, frankly.
They will be the ones reading this document.
And Zia, can I also just chime in that one thing that I think is helpful context here is what Chuck was saying about there being seven institutions right now. So there are currently 7 distinct processes. So then it's like thinking about all these stakeholder groups in relation to those 7 campuses or 7 colleges.
Yes, and I just accidentally sorry.
Classic to hit enter too soon.
I know they need like a word for it. I just stopped GPT from responding, so that's okay. I'll scroll up here so it's edited out in a hacky way. Okay, so yeah, so you're saying one important thing to remember is that currently there are 7 different colleges using 7 different processes to do this. Is that what you were the context you were hoping to include, Audrey?
Yeah, and the goal is to create consistency for all 7.
Okay. All right, and so we don't know, and one thing to point out here is that we don't know how GPT is necessarily going to interpret that, but it will now take that into consideration as it does its work. Chuck, as you look at this, is there anything you would edit about it or add to it?
I mean, I think we're at a point to plug that, see what comes out, and then another iteration likely after that.
All right, let's see. Great, it's asking me even more questions. So I'll go back to you. When you see this list comes up, there are a couple here that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to know about that. But since you're our focus here, what do you want to know more about? What do you want to add as context?
Well, I guess this is almost the evaluation, the key differences, the implementation, training and support. I'm still not seeing, I guess, the specific process, almost like we'll worry about this after the evaluation, how to transition people, but show me the process.
Okay,
So I think
yeah.
What might be missing here is we didn't describe what the actual, like there are a million processes. We haven't said this is for students onboarding at an institution.
Oh, did I not say that? Wow. Okay,
No.
sorry.
So right now, that's all right. So I think we need to specify and say the process here that we want to make consistent is the onboarding process for, are we going to say in this case, a traditional student, Chuck? And then we might want to make iterations of this for adult learners / early college / all these other groups down the line.
Yeah, I mean, onboarding, orientation, academic advising, if we need to, if it's helpful to be more specific.
Yep. And also, like you were mentioning, getting up to speed on different systems.
Yeah, comfort with academic technology.
Okay. Sorry for, I wrote that down in my notes and then didn't put it in our original prompt apparently. So, okay,
No
but that's
worries.
good. But we're iterative prompting, so it should still give us what we're looking for. Okay, so I've added more context here just for our listeners, since some folks might be listening to this. The process we want to begin with is students are onboarded as a tradition, or students that are onboarded are traditional students. From being accepted to being registered and ready for classes. This would include orientation, academic advising, getting up to speed on the various systems of the college, which we consider academic technology. Is this all accurate?
Maybe we could just change the accepted to from expressing interest.
Inquiry.
Okay.
Yeah.
From inquiry. Because most community college applicants are going to be accepted.
Yeah. Okay.
If not all of them. So that way we're opening up the funnel a little more.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Anything else you'd add, Chuck, or change?
No, curious to see where it goes from here.
All right, cool. Let's see. What is it up to? Now I'm curious. Oh, okay, cool. So that's great. So now it's adding that context to its memory. This is we're somewhat new to me because this memory updated is like in the last couple weeks has shown up in GPT. So now we wait for it to. There we go. Okay. All right. It's still asking us questions, and I kind of feel like we're all kind of clamoring to be like, can you just give us a little, like, just give us a draft of what you might spit out. I see you see a bunch of stuff coming up here. What's your take? Should we add a little more context, or should we just say like, hey, what would an outline look like?
Yeah, that's where I am. I mean, because some of this is they're asking things that we don't need to know yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Maybe
let's do it.
we could just add, could you reference existing best practice research and empirical studies on student onboarding at a community college to provide a recommendation for like a first outline, just so it's not just like, here's a list of things you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Firing questions back.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And so hopefully it gives us, there's a term you may have heard, hallucination, where sometimes when you ask for things, it'll say you should do this and it's backed by research. And then when you ask it like, well, what research, it just made it up. It doesn't have an actual link. So by asking it this way, we hope that it's going to draw upon the best practice that it's been trained on. So let's see what it gives us. Okay, so it's actually searching, which is good.
It's a great look.
Yeah. All right. So now we've got a recommended outline that's popping up on our screen.
Connect, inspire, plan. Interesting.
So there's like the inquiry and initial contact piece. So what information is required? What are the channels? There's the piece where there's some initial advising sessions. I'm curious so far as you kind of like look at these different ideas, how close is this to what I know it's different in every call in the 7 different places, but about how close is this to if there was a standard procedure?
I'd say we're at 30,000 feet. I think if someone was to sit down and start designing, these are the considerations, right? I think these are some of the components, the considerations. But I think this would be the starting point of saying, okay, now we know this all needs to be done. The career exploration, the advising, the registration. What is the best way to be doing that?
Okay.
So I think we're narrowing.
All right. So it feels like a little zoom in might be appropriate here. I'll throw this question out to both of you, to either of you. We can zoom into any piece of this. Like if there's a piece where you're like, yeah, okay, that'd be really cool, but that I'm really unsure about how to develop that particular piece. We can zoom in on that. So what jumps out at you all?
I mean, developing the educational plan is always a place where it's tied to everything else, meaning that students don't know how to get on a personalized advising plan until they have done the career exploration. They know what they want to be taking. They understand their own schedule, so which courses they can take. Are they going to be part-time, full-time? I feel like a lot of pieces are tied to that specific educational plan.
Okay.
I feel like if I'm observing kind of what we're looking for is maybe like a list that's more transactional of like what are the actual transactional steps that a student needs to take so that those are consistent, where this is looking at thematically and conceptually what are the things that a student needs to do, and like applying is the transactional step of inquiry, but it actually didn't state applying anywhere that I saw, like submit an application. So we could probably refine it to now say, could you spell out the transactional steps that a student should take based on this framework? And also, one other observation that I had about these steps is that it's quite front loaded. Which would be great in theory, but most community college students show up late to register. And to do all of this, like light the fire and their learning and all of these things are not possible to do if it's 2 weeks before the start of classes necessarily. So maybe just adding like being more realistic about what could be done before registration versus during the semester.
Okay. Here's how I'll phrase it, and you guys can jump in and change this. Could you spell out the transactional steps that a student should take based on this framework? And I meant to say, for instance, here, a step-by-step for students for what students could do before they register for classes. Changes?
Sure.
I mean, with the terminology of how could we operationalize this, I mean,
Perfect.
just to change the mindset.
Yeah.
Right. 'Cause obviously, we don't like transactional in a way. Like, we want to be transformational, but at the same time, like, we need to know what are the actual transactions. That's where we collect the data. That's where we
touch points.
Right. Exactly.
Now, if I put operational/transactional, are you all comfortable with that? And that way we get a little flavor of both and we'll see what it gives us.
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
What's the worst that's going to
Yeah,
happen?
it's all
Yeah, you can't break it. All right, here we're getting something. Okay.
Express interest. Yes. Now it's first person, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this almost feels like something you'd see on the website. Like, okay, if you're interested, first thing you're going to do is fill out this inquiry form.
Visit the
Mm-hmm.
call, attend. I like this.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Much more actionable.
And then what's nice, you could take this and say, now create a to-do list for the college to operationalize this checklist. Like, we have this process, but we don't send packets or whatever.
Yeah.
While keeping best practice research. Like at the end of the last iteration was Community College Research Center and some others. So I like that. That's where we're scraping and finding some of this content.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. It for those watching this, you can actually see
CCRC.
Now, I'm curious. I'm just going to click on one of these and see if it looks like these are actual links, but we'll just verify. Yeah, cool. Great. Great prompt, Audrey. That actually gave us some really good stuff because now it's actually drawing upon best practices. Okay, cool. So now we are, so now we've got a step-by-step here. And of course, this can be modified and tailored. What would be your next step now that you have this outline?
I mean, I think Audrey was starting to head this direction, I believe. I mean, this is what students need to make sure they're doing. So I can see this on a front-facing website, students, my how-tos or whatever. But then there's the actual implementation, and there's the staff and faculty side of it being operationalized. So, for example, I mean, I don't know, pick any one of those. What is the staff role in this? So in their inquiry and initial contact. So steps for if someone is completing a web form, the student, what does that look like on the back end now for staff? When they receive that, are they generating a letter? What are next steps? So they'd say submit a transcript. This is what you need to complete your application. So there are steps for staff on each side of these.
Yeah. All right. What I wrote is pretty simple. What is the staff role in number 2? What is the detailed to-do list that staff would need and that we could provide for them? The idea here being like you just able to hand this to them and say, okay, so and if a student is in step 2, here are all the things that you need to accomplish, whether you put that into your monday.com or whatever it might be. Is that an accurate way of putting it?
I think so. And if it works for that, we do it for each number.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So they're going to schedule meetings. They're going to prepare the session. They're going to conduct the advising session. And then there's actually a format to do that. Do the advisors have a format already, or is it sort of like they just meet with the student and talk?
They have a format, whether it's a 45 minutes, cover this. By the end, they are doing these 10 things. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say it's scripted, but each college has it. It's different at each college. But.
Sure.
One thing that I was going to say is it seems like it's kind of assuming that you're starting from a blank slate a little bit, where then in this case, like that's not true. We have 7 very, very probably full slates at 7 different colleges. And so the challenge will be reconciling like an ideal to-do list with the existing process. There's always questions of like the time of year you implement a new process. Does that mean half the students went through the old process, half the students go through the new? How do you update your systems? How do you reflect this in your communication? All of that. And so one thing that you could almost do is like train a custom GPT on this new process. And then I'm kind of thinking about this on the fly, but you could then have each college talk to the custom GPT about their specific situation and current process and say, okay, here's what we do. Like, we actually do orientation before advising and it's a requirement, but you want us to do orientation after advising. This is why. Here's where we currently are. What would we need to do to adjust the process, make us a project plan, something like that. But that could be one longer term approach. Once you get to the point where you take this, bring it to all the schools and have them agree on a specific process, then it could be kind of like a little built-in consultant for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this becomes the SOP, right? I mean, so then they've got it, and then where the variations are, they better have a good reason for here's why we do it this way instead of the way that CCRC really documented as best practice, right? So this becomes the standard.
Yeah.
And one thing to keep in mind too, I'm sorry, Zia, I don't want to be dominating, but just double checking that this is actually what CCRC said. Because even though they can put a link, doesn't mean that that's what the link really suggests. And so it should ideally bring us a lot closer. And obviously CCRC is an awesome source of best practices. And this seems like it makes sense, but just doing a quick once over before you go kind of like stick your neck out there with a group of 7 different schools that might not want to or be ready necessarily to embrace changing all their processes. Because I could see that being like an easy target of like, yeah, well, CCRC actually said this and AI hallucinated.
I think some of that's in messaging and delivery, right? So I'm not going to say, oh, this is what CCRC said, but looking at this, I don't see anything controversial.
Agreed.
As I'm looking at this, it seems logical and these are step by step. And I think this to me is a conversation starter as well. Putting this in front of folks, I think it's just as important, if not more important, after having this content, to sit with folks and say, look, here is a way to do it. If there is a variance, why do we do it that way? Let's talk that through. And then as a team, maybe we're looking at this more, but also saying, what are the best practices and why? Well, here are some links. I think it turns into like workshopping, right?
Totally.
I switched to this tab because you're right. I think that for this particular one, when we look at the output, it's nothing like that makes us say like, whoa, what's going on? Like we really need to dig into the source. And yet it is really important to make sure that it is referencing sources that are referencing it in the right way. Because it looked at this website, but this website has a lot of stuff on it and may sometimes send conflicting information. So one thing you might think about is like, okay, for instance, I just happen to look at this guided pathways model, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I might say, okay, I'm going to just take these 4 little areas that they talk about in the guided pathways model. And I'm going to go back to GPT. And I may ask it, how have you incorporated or tended to the following 4 areas of guided pathways? And what's nice now is that this may not go in our document, but it gives us some rationale as to exactly why we've covered the things we've covered. So you can see here that it's now breaking it down by the area and then telling us what pieces tend to that area. So you can get even more granular.
I love this. And I feel like based on the conversation we've had, now we could say, I have a meeting coming up with the directors of onboarding, like whatever their titles are, at all 7 schools, outline an agenda for the meeting and draft a document that I can present that collects all of this information and recommendations for us to begin working.
Would that be useful, Chuck? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's so I meet with our academic advisors. We're having these conversations about the common student experience. So like I said, I think this would be a place I would take that document, I would use the agenda and say, look, in addition to whatever else is on the agenda that day, here's a place to start. And then it becomes a conversation, a discussion. Why do you do things differently? But I think this gives us that basis. It's not me coming in with an iron fist and saying, this is the best practice, we're doing it this way. But I don't think there's anything in this that is someone's going to take issue with, because everything I'm reading it so far is on point.
So we want to give you something to walk away with that you can actually use, and maybe there'll be more refinement needed later. But I'm curious to know, One thing we haven't talked about is the emotional connection to whoever is reading this. Like you're saying, like you don't want to come in and be like, we're making this change and because I said so, right? It's connected to research. It's actually things that will be useful. It's going to make our lives better. So what is the benefit? What, like, let's say we were going to make an outline. I think that's something that would be, you were saying would be useful. Generate an outline for, and you're saying you're meeting with advisors,
Yep.
with academic advisors about some of the proposed changes. And bear in mind that their needs are, and then you tell me what you think their needs are.
Well, their needs, first of all, are going to be, I mean, some of this is change management more broadly, right? So their needs are going to be keeping the student at the center, understanding consistency, and then letting go of something that is not a best practice and transitioning to the best practice.
Okay.
If applicable.
Yeah. Okay. And so, I'll say, make sure that in this outline, you include talking points that help with the change management piece. And hopefully it understands what I mean by that. I can be more detailed later, but so far, does that general explanation make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes the human conversations we've got to have with this after, right?
So I just, off the bat, what it's coming up with are things like keeping the student at the center and then some talking points around that, understanding consistency and some talking points around that, letting go of outdated practice, all the things that we listed as what the needs might be. I love this because it kind of went from like, what's our detailed transactional process, which is good to know and good to have documented, to how do I now communicate this to an audience, and so that in a way that they don't feel like they're being ambushed or being like told like, oh, you're just changing a process because, which could always go south. What are your thoughts, Chuck, as you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, for a variety of things, I think this is the logical next step. Is you start with content, right? We went to standard operating procedures. We have based in research, we have a document here, but then it's delivery. It's all about messaging and delivery. We're not trying to take anything away from you, particularly not your autonomy to develop your own processes. We've got a standard process here. It's about students, which was number one, students at the center. And we're happy to help you. What do you need for resources to transition through this? Do you need training? Is it bringing groups together more specifically on some of the more granular items? So I think it's understanding that this is the people side of it, right? People are emotionally attached to things, and change is hard, change is different. What's in it for me? How does this impact my work? So this is very useful. This is very useful. It takes the stale, if you will, the online, the robot, the chat GPT scary item thing, whatever that is out there that scares everybody, to here's how it can be helpful. It's done the basis of our conversation, but let's worry about the human side of it now. Let's put all of our energy and efforts over there without tiring us out, putting all this together and saying, all right, just do it, which I feel is how some change happens.
Yeah. And I also think, like, Chuck, this is probably one of many, many other things that you're doing on any given day. And just having been in that experience myself, not as a vice chancellor, but it can be tough when you're managing lots of change initiatives to pause and craft such a thoughtful messaging approach for every single meeting when you're like back to back every day. And so I like to think, how could this just not only lighten the load slightly, but also then help you be more intentional in all of those meetings. Like, you can be more prepared for everything, not so you can take on more, but just so you can be more effective and human oriented.
Yeah, use the brain power where it's most needed, right?
Right, exactly.
And that really is such an important point to consider, is that like we've offloaded a lot of the thinking, a lot of the cognitive stuff, but we haven't lost control. We haven't lost our human control over the process. And as you just pointed out, we've used it almost like a thought partner to give us some ideas for what this meeting might look like, taking into consideration the needs of the audience, because it could be that we didn't think about that and just walked in and we're like, here's a new process, take it, run with it. We need to formalize it, go. Imagine if every manager and every chancellor and vice chancellor thought this way. It'd be really cool that they went through this process and really considered the needs of their audience. I'm sure all of them do, but in the event that they don't.
I'm sure they all do.
Yeah, but in the event that they don't, now they have this episode to learn from. So
You got it. You got it.
So
That's the goal is set aside the pieces that can be automated and let someone else do some of the more transactional, thinking, et cetera, and then focus your energy on people.
Right.
So what would be your next, if I were to hand you this chat now and you were to take it over offline, what would be your next steps?
I think consolidating this document, creating a conversation with our academic advisors, and just putting this in front of them to tear apart and also see where the variances may exist, and see if we can create one standard process. This might be the foundation, and I use 70%. This might be 70% of it, but we're already 70% of the way there instead of 0%, right? So now we can have people edit and customize, personalize this a little bit, and see where they fit. So they'd be able to read, particularly when we said to operationalize for the staff. Staff would be able to say, okay, this is what I would maybe have to do a little different, or this is exactly what I'm doing. So some of this might be reinforcement as well. Let's not assume that people aren't doing some of this already. They may be able to just check and say, all right, check this box, check this off. I have this already. I do this assessment, whatever it might be. So
Yeah. Well,
it might be reaffirming.
And one thing, yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of reaffirmation with GPT and AI. One thing that we want to let you know is that these chats they're supposed to be everlasting in the sense that when you create a chat, this back and forth, you can come back to it on a later date, continue the conversation, and it'll have the memory of that conversation before. So what you can do is have this meeting and get this feedback that you write down in a Word document or whatever. Come back to ChatGPT and say, okay, here's the feedback I received. Now, it could be that you say, and I don't want to incorporate all of this because some of this, it may be like specific to that person and we don't want to put that in the actual process. So I might even say like granular, let's go through each the main themes of these pieces of feedback. You tell me what you think you could implement before you implement it, and I'll either approve or not approve it. Or that may be a process that doesn't require AI that you might just think through on your own, but that is one way to use it, again, to further assist you. We just want to give you as many ideas as we can while we're here.
Arm me with more ammo.
So give us, I know you've talked about this a lot already, but just tell us briefly, what are you walking away with today from this learning session?
I feel I've got a real tangible way to walk into a meeting prepared, a starting point for conversation and change management. And I also feel it's an opportunity not to spend all of my energy and efforts into creating an outline and talking through specifically each of these areas, but now we can come in and have the human side, the connection, the conversation around what some of the best practices already are.
All right. And one question I love to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say 1, like I had zero idea what I was doing on this particular topic when I came in, and 10 being like, now I'm a master at this. Where did you come in and where are you leaving? What numbers?
Well, I'm going to stick with my 3 when I first came in because I'm confident, and I would type in. Audrey had done some prompt engineering work with us in the recent past, so I was familiar there. I put myself up in the 5.5 or 6. I feel like I could now utilize this as a tool versus something I play with.
Love it. Mission accomplished. Cool. Any
cool.
last thoughts, Audrey, before we wrap up?
No, this was really great. Chuck, you'll have to let us know if you have this conversation, how it goes and how it's received by the advisors. I'm very intrigued.
For sure. Yeah. For sure. No, appreciate the help. This is great.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Appreciate your time and your expertise.
You're welcome. Talk to you later,
Chuck. Have a good one.
Take care.